Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I'm Thomas Vick, joined by Seth Wilson of Adler Attorneys in Noblesville, Indiana. Seth, how are you today?
Doing great, Thomas. How about yourself?
I am doing well, doing well. Um, I figured today we might talk about an issue that is kind of tough to talk about, but it sometimes, it's pretty common, and it's an unfortunate situation to talk about, but hospice and some options that might be available for those that have a loved one going through hospice care, and maybe some estate planning techniques when somebody is in that situation. Perhaps they have a surviving spouse, or they have a house that they want to transfer over to a loved one, whether that's a son or daughter or grandson, granddaughter, something like that. Um, so let me just kind of open up the floor and ask you, what kinds of things should we be thinking about when an individual is nearing death?
Yeah, it's always a difficult time, and it's a balance of competing concerns because you want to maximize what time you do have remaining with your loved one. And yet there's some of the logistical things that may need to happen to help preserve assets or even provide the necessary assets to help with the care that's going to be there. But I think that first and foremost is just the recognition that all this other stuff is only money, right? And sometimes there's a necessity for that or what have you, but really working through the care piece first is really the most important, and walking through that with your family and your loved ones, because that's obviously the culmination of a life well lived oftentimes. So as you think about that, then you kind of take that step back of, okay, now as we're looking at the whole picture, how do we do this best? How do we provide the care so that there's less need outside care being brought in? Sometimes that even involves maybe moving someone into your house or you moving into someone else's house. And so there's some things to think about along that side in terms of, are you considering maybe a life estate so you protect the sort of integrity of the ownership structure if you move into mom's house, for example, to take care of mom? Or do you do the opposite, where she moves in with you and you sell the other house, or something along those lines? And then there's some other options that you and I kind of chatted. So I'll throw that back to you to see
Yeah,
your thoughts.
yeah. So in a hospice situation, uh, the general rule is hospice will pay for almost everything. Hospice will take care of a lot. Um, but the one big thing that hospice will not take care of is room and board. And so then it's a question of, well, does it make sense to apply for Medicaid so that Medicaid will cover room and board if the individual is in a facility? Um, or, I think you mentioned it, that it might just make sense to bring the loved one home for the final days. And, that's probably a lot of people's wishes anyway, to be at home and be at peace. So, um, you know, that's certainly the way that I would do it in my family. And so there's that, and that's depressing. So let's kind of change the topic. uh, and then like the financial piece of that, there are like hospice houses. There you might be able to find somebody that can be provide a free service, but those are very few and far between. And I've had a situation a time or two where I'm like, this is when I was a little bit less familiar with hospice, but I was calling around to see if there was anybody that would take this loved one that was approaching his final days. And it it's very, very difficult to find those kinds of places. Um, so being at home is probably the best option for folks, so that they're, uh, if there are financial reasons, it's probably best to keep them at home if possible. Um, but then when you're thinking about you know, if you're going to go the Medicaid route, maybe there's you know, a spouse that is still healthy and living at home, but needs some additional help, and loved ones come in and live with that. We'll just say, the surviving spouse. That surviving spouse, after 2 years of that an adult child living with them in the home, you could transfer the house to that adult child as an exempt transfer. And that's a wonderful way of being able to protect that large asset in the estate. So transferring that to an adult child who moved into the home to keep the parent at home, providing care, and basically help them to not move into a nursing home before it was absolutely necessary. That can be a great planning aspect, great planning piece. And then if you got somebody that, you've got a spouse who has died but was on Medicaid when he died, and then the surviving spouse is living at home, avoiding probate is really important, because Medicaid estate recovery, while they won't recover after the first spouse passes away, they will make recovery efforts when the surviving spouse passes away. So avoiding probate when that surviving spouse passes away is really important. So that's where we begin to talk about transfer on death deeds and revocable trusts, or maybe even a Medicaid asset protection trust. Avoid probate, and then if you do the Medicaid asset protection trust, that would help the start a 5-year look back period, so that after 5 years the house would be protected. So those are some ideas that I have.
And I think one thing that came to mind while you were going through that analysis was, if you have power of attorney dedicated to you or designated to you, oftentimes there's a provision in there about this situation and timing in life, right? And so the power of attorney made their wishes known as to what they would like to have happen, the principle of that power of attorney. So oftentimes we put in language that says, look, if I'm at this stage of my life where I'm going to need end stage care and I can be at home, try to keep me in my home. And so that's, if you don't know what to do in that scenario or what the wishes were, go back and read through the power of attorney for healthcare purposes and see if there's any instructional type information as to that situation. And that will kind of help guide what the wishes are of your loved one in that scenario.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When in doubt, read the document, right?
It's amazing how many times we kind of gloss over that step. A lot of times it's relational. You understand and know the individuals that you're working with and helping out, and kind of think, well, I'm okay because this is how it would go. And sometimes the documents give you a little bit more guidance and insight into a couple of those issues of end stage type things. And I think it helps from the objective standpoint at that juncture, because the emotional toll is very high at that stage. And so to have some written plan and sort of understanding this was already pre-decided can be helpful as you navigate these difficult times.
That's right. And I'll kind of flip the coin on us. We talked a little bit about, maybe an adult child moves into the home of a parent, and then the parent transfers the house over, after 2 years of the child helping out. But the opposite situation could work as well, where an adult, when the parent moves in with the child, the parent could purchase a life estate in the home of the child, and then that is not a penalizable transfer for Medicaid purposes, and it transfers the money over to an adult child, gets it to the succeeding generation, and then they kind of make a family decision about what to do with the proceeds of the sale of the life estate. But that can be a good planning technique for folks. And elder law attorneys can help out with that kind of situation too.
Yeah, and I think without one of the main things to recognize is that is a very fact sensitive discussion and decision, because there's a lot of different methods to value the interest of the life estate. And you don't want to think, well, I'll just do that and maybe put a
Right.
number on it and then have an unpleasant surprise later on when Medicaid estate recovery comes knocking on the door, kind of thing. You want to make sure that you've planned that appropriately, and that the idea is to help transition assets, but not potentially all the assets from there. So that's one you want to make sure that you're meeting with an elder law attorney to discuss how that would best be handled.
Yep, actuarially sound is the word that we're looking for there. So,
well, let me call my actuary up and I'll get those numbers for you. You know, I know some of us have some on speed dial, I suppose, but that's not an everyday thing typically.
that's true. That's true. Well, good discussion today, Seth. How can people get in touch with you?
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate it. We are located here in the heart of Hamilton County in Noblesville, Indiana, and that's our web address is noblesvilleattorney.com. That's where you can find our contact information. And how about yourself?
And I am Thomas Vick of Vick Law PC in Greenwood, Indiana. And you can find me by going to vicklaw.org. Well, I appreciate it as always, Seth, and we will talk to you later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.